this evening. My name is Adam Ryan, and I am one of the curators here at CPW. And tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce the photographer Justin Kimball. But before I do, I have some housekeeping items to get through. So our spring classes are filling up, but we have a few that we should highlight because we have a couple spots left open. We have Jim Lafferty. Jim Lafferty is teaching a 5-part crash course in digital photography that covers a ton of valuable skills like portrait lighting, tethering, shooting on location, as well as a deeper look at studio lighting. Our own Kiana Mestrick of the Dodge and Burn blog is leading a critique group for CPW twice a month and alternating between in-person and virtual. And you can sign up for as many meetings as you need to fit your schedule, your project timeline, and your budget. And so to learn more, talk to our staff, or you can find this information on our website. And these classes are starting this month, so don't miss out. However, tonight, we're welcoming Justin Kimball. Kimball's work has long been distinguished by its deep sensitivity to place and the people who inhabit it, whether documenting the quiet persistence of life in post-industrial towns or capturing the fragile beauty of ordinary moments. His photographs reveal an intimate understanding of the world we actually live in, its struggles, its dignity, and its fleeting grace. His projects, including Elegy and Pieces of String, invite us to look more closely at the landscapes we often pass by, urging us to see not just what remains, but what continues. Through his lens, we encounter a world that is familiar, yet filled with unexpected depth, a world shaped by resilience, memory, and the quiet poetry of everyday life. We're fortunate to have him with us today to share more about his work, his process, and the stories behind his images. So please join me in welcoming Justin Kimball.
Sorry, I'm just starting the timer here. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. I feel like after that introduction, I don't need to say anything. Thank you for that, Adam, and thanks for everybody here at the at the center for having me here tonight. I feel like I've done so many of these, and I still get a little nervous. So bear with me. I was driving my daughter to school this morning, and she said, I said, "You looking forward tonight?" She said, "You looking forward to tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a little nervous." She goes, "Why? Are photography people judgy?" And I said, "Yeah, no, they're really warm and fuzzy." So anyway, here we are. Again, I want to thank Nicole and Sarah, Adam, Marina, and Brian for having me here and for all the good work this place has been doing. Just a little bit of what I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to try and do something a little bit different. I'm going to do the first half, or maybe a little more, is going to be slides. But part of what I'm interested in is the material objects, right? The things that we make and put out there into the world, both for me, both in book and print form. So I'm going to, at a certain point, ask people to get up. I got a table of prints over there. So we're going to look at some prints. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about bookmaking and why that's sort of been a super important part of my practice. So to get started, I should also say that I'm so happy to be in this new space that you guys have done. It's just brilliant. I started out, this is a catalog from CPW, I think in 1990 or 91. It was from a show called, I think it was The Family of Man Revisited. And I found the catalog, and then I found a bunch of friends in here too. Tanya Marcuse, Andrea Modica, and Constance Thalkin were also in that show. And it was curated by Larry Fink. And I just I know we all know it, but this place is so important. It's been, I mean, here, this is 35 years ago, and it was like right out of grad school, one of the first little opportunities that I had to show work somewhere. It meant a great deal to me then, and now here I am, you know, in this great big new space 35 years later, and I just feel like it's still taking care of me. It's taking care of the community. It's offering young and old photographers a chance. I'm going to just give you a little bit of background about sort of where I come from and how I got interested in photography. My family used to spend a lot of time on the road in a van, four of us and two parents driving around in the van, traveling to, you know, sometimes for 2 months, sometimes for 4 months. And we kind of lived out of this van and went to all these places across the United States. And that's really where I discovered my first camera. My mom was a printmaker, and she had this 2 1/4 camera, and I started using that camera to photograph. And there's a few things along the way. I was not a big reader as a kid. In fact, big learning disability. But for some reason, these 2 books, this Carson McCullers and this Nick Adams book, stuck with me. They're like, I think 2 of the only books I actually read from the time I was 11 till 18, maybe something like that. And this Winslow Homer poster, which was on my wall. And I know it's silly, but these things really helped sort of develop my sense of self as a young person in the world. And if you know the stories in either one of them, they are often about individuals sort of on their own, a little bit against the world, living on the outside a little bit. I couldn't sleep at night, so I watched movies all night. And that's sort of how I picked up a lot of my visual language and interest in things that were visual. So the upper right is Marlon Brando from On the Waterfront. Those other 2 on the left are both are both from The Last Picture Show. And when I say that I sort of took over the persona of these people that I was reading about or seeing in these movies, I'm not kidding. That lower right picture is me. And that's a photograph, I think I was 19, and my friend Stan Chong took that photograph of me at Coney Island, where we were out photographing that day. Oh, I didn't mean to show that yet. Pretend you didn't see that. So as I said, I used to travel around with my family and the camera, and I had this camera, and I just started taking it and going out and photographing people, photographing strangers at the campgrounds we were at craft festivals, fairs, all of this kind of stuff. And that camera, because we were moving all the time, became a way for me to sort of take control of the world that I felt like I had no purchase in. It allowed me to sort of grab little pieces of it and hold on to something and feel like I was part of it in some way. It gave me a sense of stability. And those pictures were super important. And luckily, I was also kind of a wild kid. I got in trouble a lot. And I think my parents were like, they just kept buying me more film, and I would get it developed at the drugstore at the end of every summer or every few months. And I'd get back these prints. And I made this picture when I was like 13, where I photographed this guy. You've already seen it, so it's kind of, the illusion's kind of blown. But I made this picture when I was like 13 of a carnival worker drinking water out of a gin bottle. And it was a bunch of little kids. And in my head, that picture was like, it was black and white and dry and dusty. Like I had this whole sort of black and white movie image of that head as I remembered it, right? That photograph. And when I made that picture, this thing happened that was crazy. I realized that I could, such a little thing, but I was like, oh, I can make it look like this guy's supposed to be watching these kids, but he's chugging gin instead, right? And I loved this idea that you could create something this idea that, in my head, photography was about something real, and all of a sudden it could be about something fictional. And or on the precipice of those two, right? And I loved that idea. And I was giving this talk maybe 10 years ago, and my mom was in the audience. And a week or two after the talk, I get this picture in the mail from my mother, which I thought all this stuff was long gone and lost. And that's the picture that I had made of the guy drinking gin. Now, first of all, this also brings me to something I'm really interested in, which is memory. I had a completely different vision of what that picture looked like in my head. And for years, I've been describing it as like this black and white picture that looked quite different from this. And then I get this color picture back. It's also PS square, which I suppose I should have known it, but in my head, it was rectangular. It became this really important, that picture now is like important for two reasons. It gave me an insight into what photography could be about for me, which is kind of storytelling in some way. And it also later then got me thinking a lot more about memory and how it's impossible to have an actual memory, right? Every memory that we have, when we remember it again, is colored by other experience we've had since, right? There's no way to actually experience that thing again, even though many of us desperately try, right? So that picture became hugely important to me. And after I got out of grad, sometime after, I'm gonna go through quickly, I'm gonna show you 3 bodies of work, and then I'll jump to the prints. And I'm gonna go pretty quickly, but I already feel like I'm going too slow. After that, I started, after grad school, I started driving around the country and really kind of as a tourist, just going to the places I had traveled to with my family. And I started making these pictures and realizing the experience that I had imagined, like as myself being sort of alone in the wild or sort of being against the world or being out in this kind of manifest destiny stuff wasn't really, maybe never was plausible, and really certainly wasn't plausible anymore. It wasn't the experience that I was having. So I started like looking back at painting that I liked, not even so much at photography, but tons of photography from the Hudson Valley, for instance. Obviously Thomas Eakins and Thomas Durand. And I started looking at a lot of that work as I was going out, and I started making these photographs of people in the landscape, again, just starting out where I'd gone with my parents and then expanding, really driving around the country for quite a few years, actually, looking at these places and working on this project where the experience is supposed to be one thing, but in my pictures, something in the landscape is either marred or scarred or broken, or the people are marred or scarred or broken. No longer are we standing on these great vistas being full of ownership in some way. Now we're a young boy at the edge of, not just jumping off a bridge for fun, but like this dark abyss, beyond them in some way. And there's some like total, the picture on the left is like, I'm like standing, chest deep in water in this little dark ravine that I got into at the last moment. And these people are lit by sun. And I was like, oh my God, that's Thomas Eakins. It's like an Eakins painting to me almost, right? And so these things were coming back, and I was trying to build them into the work. And I'll also say that this was I was mostly a street photographer before this. And this group of pictures was very different for me because I was slowing down. I was going to places where I'd show up and there'd be 2 people, right? Or 5 people. And I started talking to people. I would ask them to redo things sometimes. I'm shooting with a larger format, a medium format. I started with a large format camera, then moved to a medium format camera. And then I'm having them move around. And for the purpose of this talk anyway, I don't usually like to sort of tell the stories behind these things. But the picture on your left, I got there and those 2 people were swimming nude in the water when I got there. And then they climbed, I asked them if I could take their picture, and then they climbed out of the water and immediately, sort of put their clothes on. And then I'm talking to them, and again, more than you maybe need to know. I don't even think you need to know this in the picture, but it fueled my imagination. They start talking, and she is actually his niece. And again, they were swimming nude together in the water. It was a pretty weird situation. And then I asked them if I can photograph her, and she immediately climbs up on that stone and then makes that kind of defensive gesture. And I shift where my body is because I tried to, I don't know if you can see my thing here. I shifted my body. I was standing way over to the left, and I shifted my body so that I could use the shadow to create this physical break between the two of them. And I tell you that only because so often we think about photography as being something that isn't constructed even in these kinds of situations, but it is, right? We're always sort of taking something out of a picture or moving our body to include things in the frame in the way that we want them to do. And I don't think if they even said that thing to me that I already knew that that one was standing there like Venus, right? Like a Botticelli or something. And then I moved my body so that to again create this real separation between the two. I'm going to start picking up the pace here because and so this body work ended up being my first book, which is called Where We Find Ourselves. I did the Botticelli and then I did David over here too, just because I felt, only he's now popping out of his jeans and stuff, right? He can't sort of make it anymore. And that's the last picture in that book. The next body of work, and again, I always work in book form. I got into this place where I felt like I was making these pictures, I was having shows. That's still part of my practice, very much so, which is why I kind of want to show you those prints tonight. But I got into this place where, for me, I'd always had this thing, like I want to like fill that frame and build, I want everything in the frame to mean something. I want everything to be talking to each other, the way the dirt looks, the way the body looks, all this kind of stuff. And then somehow that started, I wanted something more. And the book offered a way to build a longer form narrative in some way, by still thinking about what artists used to say, like this to this, right? Like what happens when I put this thing next to this thing. And then I started thinking about like, how do I do that picture to picture, or even in this sort of broader thing where I could build some larger kind of narrative into the work that I was interested in, that also, that somehow I felt like the individual, at least at that point, I felt like the individual picture couldn't sustain for me. And so I got really interested in sort of building books. And it was around the same time when book publishing, maybe 20 years ago, when book publishing was really starting to change. And it's even changed like 10 years, even 10 years ago, it's changed again, like completely. It was really hard and impossible to get a book. The books you did were all big production books, right? There were no small publishers, very few, unless you were making artist books and doing short runs. And so I got lucky and I made this book, and then I got lucky again and I got to start working with David Chicky at Radius Books. And that was an amazing experience because he would actually let me, which wasn't true before, he would let me do the things I wanted to do to build the container for the photographs, right? And I'm going to talk about that in a second, in a minute when I go on. So this is a body of work that I made. I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and then I'm not going to talk during the pictures because I made this thing. It's small. You're supposed to hold it in your hands. You're supposed to go through it. They're all photographs that I made in the homes of people who had died. My brother is an auctioneer, and so I got him to sort of let me come in along with him when he was cleaning out the homes of these people, and I started making pictures in those spaces. And that all started because I had this crazy experience where for a long time before I had a regular teaching job, I bought and sold antiques and 19th and 20th century photographs and cameras, anything I could do to make money. I was also a carpenter and I taught part-time, right? And then so a friend of mine asked me to go down to Arkansas and help clean out her great uncle's house, which ended up not being a house, but like a shotgun shack that had been a store previously, on the side of the road. And we got in there and it was pretty rough in there. And in the main room, there was a chair, an ashtray, one light that looked at the storefront window, which had big curtains in it. And next to it, there was a, I keep stepping over here. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So I'm gonna go back over here. So there was a big like easy boy chair, and next to it, there was a stack of cardboard. And I go over to the stack of cardboard, and it's the insides of Wheaties boxes. He's cut the panels of Wheaties boxes, and he's been using them as a journal. And the journal says, in his sort of broken 90-something-year-old handwriting, I'm making up a date, August 22nd, and he writes the word nothing. August 23rd, nothing. This fucking high, right? And every once in a while, there's like a hitchhike to church. And I'm even getting a little misty talking about it right now. It was such an insane experience to think that this guy every night sat down and wrote nothing, which was so unbelievably sad, but also unbelievably poetic. Like the idea that he must have thought there was going to be something tomorrow if he took the time to do that. I just don't know. It's like this totem to I don't know what. And I carried that idea around in my head for like, I don't know, 8 years before I finally said, oh, I've got this connection. I could make something like that. And so these are the pictures that I made. Again, it's made to be this thing you hold in your hand. It's meant to be quiet. I'm not going to talk there. I'm just going to go through the pictures later in the questions. If you have them, you can ask. I will say almost all these places are within a half an hour of my house, probably. Mostly. And that's the last one. It's not all the pictures, it's an edit, but while I was finishing this book, this body of work, I felt like I needed more places. So I started traveling in the beginning, just actually to sort of this part of New York and up into Vermont a little bit, New Hampshire, looking for places that had been abandoned, other places where I might find some sort of evidence of who lived in those places and try to sort of build that kind of narrative. I'll also say that if you get a chance, my brother wrote the essay for this thing, who is the auctioneer, and it's a pretty interesting essay about sort of his job of sort of taking these things all apart and casting all this stuff to the wind. And I'm trying to like collect it all and try and keep a kind of, so I don't know, keep someone alive, you know, in some way. And it was interesting actually when we sent the book out for reader reviews. The readers all came back. Oh yeah, the pictures are great, but that essay. And I was like, oh man, it's a pretty good essay, right? Yeah, whoops. So as I was doing that, I was traveling farther afield. It was 2012 maybe, and on the radio, I'm listening to I'm traveling to these places and I'm listening to the news, and all I'm hearing is about the upcoming election, which at the time is Obama and Mitt Romney. And all of the conversation is about, moving people into the middle class, the upper class, the middle class, the upper class. And I'm in these places where houses are abandoned, people is left, and I'm meeting these people, and I'm like, man, these people aren't remotely part of the political conversation. And I kind of got upset by that, and so I just started going back and making pictures and going to more and more places where towns and even regions that depended on natural resources, coal, lumber, farming, etc. And I started making these pictures in those places. And when I first started, I tried to start by treating these exteriors of these places that I was photographing like the interiors of the homes that I had been photographing before. Trying to sort of see a little bit of the history, a little bit of who was there, and also thinking very much about the secular relationship of those places that seem to have these kind of big rises and falls as the economy shifts. And I got really confused while I was making this picture, because although I've been really into politics, my pictures it's hard not to be political, but they've never been overtly political. And so I ended up in this place where I was making photographs, and because it's not my nature to make pictures like that, and I felt like they were too loud and too screamy, I started like wrestling between this idea of the poetic and the political in some way, and trying to find a place in there. And weirdly, I started looking at painting again. I was looking at all this collage, and I started flattening out all the pictures. So we were like seeing foreground and background together, a little bit longer lens, further back. I'm just showing this picture because my friend Tom Young took this picture. This is a photograph of me making that last picture. So often I'm like photographing stuff from a little bit of a distance. In this situation, sometimes I'm quite close, but in this situation, I'm further away, trying to compress, the mountain and the shape of that house, the fire that had been there, the trees and the melting thing out in these industrial spaces. Again, trying to create like trying to create spaces that feel a little inescapable, a little like there wasn't too much mobility, while also looking at things that were, just like looking at the house that's on your right. They're often triplexes or duplexes, and you can see like economically how each family in each space is doing, right? And you can also see, often in the pictures a kind of how things are built. So, from brick to fiberglass, from brick to asphalt to fiberglass, these kinds of histories of making that also talk a little bit about how people are living in these spaces. And this book is mostly, there's people in here, but it's like 20% maybe. I really was looking at the places where people were living and trying to think about the history and what it felt like to be in that place. And also there's a real absence of people in some of these places. And the other thing that was sort of crazy is when I first started showing these pictures, everybody was like, oh my God, there's places that still look like this. And I'm like, it's just down the street from where you live, right? These places are no longer the anomaly, right? You can walk 10 blocks in almost any town, and this is what you find, right? And that disparity is pretty heartbreaking. And I can barely turn on the news today without weeping. So. Here I'm trying to draw all sorts of relationships between nature and all sorts of things going on. So I really felt like when I was finishing this body of work, that I was a little overwhelmed. The last two bodies of work took a lot out of me, actually. There was a lot of sadness. It's Coal Hill. No one likes this picture. No one likes this picture but me. But I really like it. It tells a story that you have to sort of be paying attention to figure out. But, you know, that's an old shipping thing where and it's not far from here, where people would, where you would drop off commerce to be distributed. And in here, the first way it got done was by the river, and the second way was by the railroad tracks at the top, and now by highway, right? So it's like there were these three levels of how everything got moved around the region, but all of it is sort of defunct, right, in the midst of all of this stuff. And these are made as far south as West Virginia and as far west as Ohio, and then all the rest of the Northeast. I just love that. I love that kid. This picture to me was like a kind of aging sundial, right? That's the last picture. So I'm going to just show you like a few of from the next book, and then I'm going to, I have no idea if this is going to work or not, people. There's kind of a lot of you. I'm going to try anyway. I'm going to turn on the lights, and I'm going to move that table over there. And I think I would love it if people could get up and take a look, but if we can't, I'll just hold stuff up and talk, right? So I'm just going to quickly breeze through these photos. So this is the book I just came out at the very end of 2022, Who by Fire. The title of this book comes from you guys probably all know the Leonard Cohen song, but I took it from a sort of earlier version. It's a prayer that gets said at Rosh Hashanah, and oh my God, just went right out of my head. Anyway, a prayer that gets said at Rosh Hashanah, and it's much about atonement, a prayer of atonement, and a prayer of redemption in some way. And as I was making this, as I started making this group of pictures, I didn't think I was going to go back to this region really again to photograph. I didn't really have that. I didn't know if I had it in me. And then I started feeling like, and this may say something more about my own, where I was in my own head, like 2019, 2018, I started making these pictures. And I felt like I was looking around and everybody was sort of walking around with, like I could see the weight of our time on their bodies, on the architecture, on the landscape. And I just started thinking a lot about that. And I just started going out and trying to make pictures about those things. And I had this big plan to sort of go all over the country, sort of photographing. I outfitted this van and all this kind of stuff. And then COVID hit. And I kept going anyway, but again, it became more regional. I would go and sleep in my van during COVID for, sort of meet people, but have a certain kind of distance to them, which was also super interesting. Like having conversations, but always at a distance, and tried to start making pictures of that experience. And in the midst of making all of those pictures, all these other things started to come up for me. I family member, and that song and that poem kept kind of coming back to me, and I really started thinking a lot about sort of death and resurrection, and there's all these ideas that are hopefully built into the pictures, sort of in the background a little bit, that are about ascension and descension in some way, about new life and old life. And and even about a shift from the last book, like thinking about people coming out. And then I finished this book in 2022. As I said, it got published in late 2022, and I think I made pictures up till like 2 weeks before we went to press. Like, it was kind of crazy. That's the back of the book. I'd really rather show the book and show some of the prints, because I think it'll be important. So why don't I stop here? Maybe we can turn the lights on. I don't know if it's possible for me to. This is going to be the hard part. This may be totally stupid, but I am so tired of looking at shit on the screen. Thank you. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but I even go to I do grad crits places and stuff, and I go there and that's all I'm looking at. I'm going, I don't understand. It's like, I want to see what the thing looks like and what it feels like. And I understand there's work that doesn't look like that. I know everybody doesn't sort of think about that in the same way that I do these days. Hey, do you want to be a good person and help me? Can you hold that for 1 second?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was going to do the lifting.
Oh, yeah. No, you're talking. You're doing the lifting. That's the fun part. So I'm gonna start here. Do we have any more light? Yeah, that's good.
You should be the auctioneer.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I could never do that. I also don't have the math skills, but my brother does, and it's kind of crazy. Although you don't have to do that anymore. Like this, it's all online. Well, actually, can you hold this for a second? That's even worse. Sorry. You're my new friend. All right, I'm going to tell you a couple of things. First of all, I just wanted to talk about the books for a second, and I think we can do that from here. First of all, this is the first book. I'm not going to go through it. I'm not going to talk about it, but there is a giant. I knew this was going to be a mess. There's a giant pile of these over there. They're free. Take one with you. If you are feeling like you've got a few extra bucks in your pocket, drop it on the desk over there for the center. Okay? Don't take the other ones. I don't have a lot of those left. This sounds altruistic, but I got to move out of my office, and there's still like 300 or 400 left. I got to get them out. So please grab one of those on your way out. I'm just going to open this up. As I said before, I've been super lucky. Hey, you know what I forgot to say, which I meant to say right in the beginning, and I was a little rattled, so I didn't. I meant to say that the title of this talk is I stole shamelessly from Mark Alice Durant. And if you don't know Mark, he runs the great press, St. Lucie, and he's a great writer about photography. And he came out with these hats. I'm going to put it on because I'm that dopey. I put it on for my family, and they told me to take it off. It somehow very much fits who I am, and maybe this talk, and certainly photos. Oh, it says unreliable narrator. So I stole it. I stole it from him, and I just feel like it's the nature of myself and pictures. They just change and stories. They just change so much over time, both for me and the viewer. It's what's magnificent about the thing, right? Anyway, so I'm really lucky to be able to work with this publisher, Radius Books. David Chicky is kind of a genius, and he lets me kind of run wild whenever we do one of these things. I go to Santa Fe, we sit down with all the pictures, we both have some ideas, we bump heads a little bit, and then we figure out how we're going to do it. This first book was like magic. We basically came in with almost the same idea. I wanted a kind of box. I sat down with him and I said, I want kind of a box, some kind of container that actually holds this. That's like going to the auctions. It's like going to the people's houses and opening these boxes up and pulling things out of there. And so he pulls out, when we first met, he pulls out this old Japanese book, which often are trifold. The way that this is, they go the other way, obviously. But the most interesting part about it is quite often, if there's a translation of the book, it gets added to the book, like over and over. So they get wide and are often held together with rubber bands, right? So that's what we did. We picked this thing. We made it this trifold, which opens up. There's a little picture in here. And then you open it up, and then inside the book, there's a little paperback book And then you open that book up, and as you're going along, you find this separate little essay of my brother's that sort of goes in there. I'm so weird. I photographed this little piece of string that I pulled out of one of the houses. By the way, I have like a garage full of stuff that I collect out of these houses that someday I think I'm going to make pictures of again. No, yeah, you don't want to be my partner. And then you open it up and you get to pull this little thing out, and I just loved it. And maybe the only mistake we made is that I printed the outside with the stains on it, so it looked as if it had been found. And they're super light. And at the last minute, I wasn't on press for this book. David pulled some black out and made it sit down a little quieter, which I didn't like at the time. But then I was like, okay, that's fine. And then I was doing this talk in Los Angeles, and I had this show, and they shipped a bunch of books there for a signing. And I got there, and I'm like, where are the books? And they're like, oh, we put them out on the loading dock. They're all stained. And I said, oh, over design. So that was a cool lesson. Anyway, and the reason I think the books are like, they're weirdly, as I described, they're weirdly important to me, mostly because they're a little bit more egalitarian. Also because, although they're still expensive, but I'll say working with David, with Radius, one of the most attractive things is about 30% of their books get sent out the door to libraries all over the country that don't have money to buy books. So it's like this whole other thing that was really great about that publisher. Plus, I largely get to really think about these containers. And I found myself doing things I never thought, like I was a kind of purist photographer. I found myself doing things I never thought that I would do to the picture. And I'll talk about that with this next book. And I'll say the other thing that's really weird is I mentioned before, I grew up having a lot of trouble reading. I now read constantly. It's a big thing for me, but whatever, it's too long a story. But I didn't read a lot when I was a kid. And this idea of me making books and putting them out into the world that have this other kind of language gives me great pleasure, I have to say. And I feel like I've got these things floating around in the world that, you know, maybe they're leveling the bed at someone's house. I don't know, but someone's going to roll over someday and pick one up, right? And I just love that about them, that they travel, right? They end up in these really weird places, and people pick something up and find something, which is kind of how I found them, or, you know, photography even. So I really like that about it. Elegy, which I talked about a little bit before. I was always like, David, I said, David, this is really different. Also, P.S., this book, when I came to him, the design was about 3 inches smaller than this. I wanted it to be small. And I don't think I've ever had a publisher say to me, that's not big enough, right? He's like, it's got to be bigger, right? Because I really wanted it to be this thing that you could hold, right? But when we went to do this book, I'm like, I need the pictures to be as big as possible. And he says, well, to do that, we're really going to have to go across the gutter. And I'm like, no. And then he's like, and then we talked about it and we started working on it. And then I realized that I had this weird thing going on. I shoot sometimes with multiple different format cameras, like different aspect ratios. And this became this really nice way. First of all, I wanted the book to feel like the pictures inside. So what we did was I have the one picture of this sort of front doorway where you can see how everything's made. And I knew that aspect ratio is going to be shorter in the book. So I said, why don't we wrap the picture 3/4 of the way around, and we make sure that you can see the cardboard underneath, so that just like in many of the pictures, you can see the construction of the book, right? And then David introduced me to this thing which I didn't really know about, which was this lay flat binding, which he claims he came up with, but I've seen it in Kudelka books and stuff, so I don't know. But I loved it because, one, I had mentioned before that this body of work, like, I really flattened out the pictures a lot. I really tried to keep this thing, and quite often, because I was doing that, things are cut up in these kinds of grids in a way. So it allowed for two different things. It allowed me to refragment the pictures as we went through, but it also, in a book this big with pictures that were all the same size, it wouldn't have worked. But I was, and part of the problem for me at the time was I there's not enough movement, right? But because we had these different aspect ratios and we made it a little taller to do this, we could move the pictures back and forth this way, which created movement between the pages, because I didn't have the opportunity to sort of say, picture this side, no picture, picture this side, no breaks, right? So we tried to figure out a way to do that by moving the pictures back and forth across here. And the lay flat binding was pretty cool. It just meant that we had to pull the spine out, right? And use a little bit looser sewing on the edge. Again, this next picture, which I never intended to be from the same place, but anyway, we made it the same trim size as the last book. It does end up being kind of a sibling of the other book in some ways, even though hopefully it's different enough. And this was much more of a straightforward book. There's almost the only thing we thought about was a few full bleeds in here. And mostly it's a more traditional style of book where we're just sort of moving through the book. There's a lot of blank pages, picture, space, picture, doubling up pictures so we see them next to each other. Again, trying to build that kind of language that I was talking about before by saying, we've seen this thing before, we've seen this thing before, we've seen this thing before, and creating a kind of, my hope is that if you show the same kind of thing a number of times, you can kind of shift the iconography or the way that we understand whatever that item or that gesture is, and begin to retune it so that we're reading it in a specific way as we go through the book. And sometimes we might not recognize that. There's like a lot of similar patterns and color things going on in here. The sequence is done by both subject, but also a lot by the lights and the patterns that are going on in the things, in the pictures themselves. So that's the books. Let's see if this is going to work. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to work, but I keep saying that. But I don't know if I got holding up the pictures. Seems like not a good way to do it, but do people want to get up? Are you guys up for that? You want to do that? It's going to be tight. If you want to sit, I'll hold them up too, but at least you'll get a chance. Those of you who are interested, you get a chance to see sort of what the prints look like at size. And this isn't even at size. This is like a step down. Usually these are like 30 by 40. And the idea is, I just think there's things that you can't see in the book. Also, like standing in a room and looking at a print, I think a lot about size and scale. And I know there's no light, so it almost doesn't matter. Oh yeah, like let's project a picture onto a picture.
Well, no, but now you actually have light on you.
Oh, yeah, I do? Okay. See, photographer.
You want to move the? There you go. That's a lot.
Okay, that's a lot. I'm just gonna go ahead and hold them up. If you want to get up close and look, it's okay. But there's all kinds of little stuff that you just can't, that I'm paying attention to that doesn't read in the book, right? And and there's a kind of tactile and feeling to the prints that I'm interested in. Again, these are generally about 30 by 40, so maybe like one size up. And so pretty big, so that you kind of feel the grass and the skin. I know it's weird, but I'm just so tired of looking at shit on the screen.
I want to ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
You disparaged that several times, but could you give us one or two specifics about why
the screen?
Why you have a problem with the screen, as opposed to
Yeah, because well, look at the color. It's all black.
I'm seeing that. I'm asking you to tell us in words.
Words.
Let's say two things.
Two things. Detail would be the first thing.
Right.
I'm pretty specific about my color palette. That would be the second.
Okay.
I feel like there's nothing like looking at an actual object. I'm like, if you're an art historian, you want to look at the real thing. You don't want to look at a picture on your computer. You can't talk about the paintbrush strokes or whatever. And I'm also into making things, right? Like I spend a lot of time making things in my I printed all these. I'm in my studio. I try all the sizes. I try different color, ratio stuff. I want it to be, even with the book, it's like I am so careful about what those things look like, even the printing in the book, right? Like the way it feels. And the book also is, it is another, it's another move away from the print even, right? You don't feel this, this is like this Bayrida paper, which is, something that they used to use for silver paper. It's a clay-based paper, right? So everything sits up there a little bit on there. It soaks it in a different way. It's not soaking into the paper, right? And it gives it the slightest little bit of tooth. Now, we're photographers, so it means like comparatively to painting, we suck, right? I mean, right, you can't get that atmosphere. You can't get that brush stroke, like those kinds of things. But there are ways in which you can build into the picture a kind of feeling or sensibility. These are in some ways, you can't tell it in here, some of the brightest pictures I've made, and what I'm making now, like the contrast is even way up for me, which is super unusual.
Do you do a lot in adjusting before you print? Like,
Not a ton. That one there wasn't too much. There was a big blowout highlighter here that I remember. But sometimes, yeah.
It seems to be the one thing you're using in the screen is the contrast. For sure.
Well, there's too much contrast, right?
yeah.
And maybe the other thing is that when you photograph, are you imagining the print?
Yes. I'll say yes, I am. But that's gone once I get to the working point. Then I'm like, where does this need to be, right? And then when I'm working towards the book or a show, I'm also trying to get the resolution, or I'm trying to get them to feel a certain way. Like even in a book, I might tweak the color a little bit to make a transition easier than it might have been before.
Are these all shot in the same format or no? Oh, God, this is like film.
None of it's film. This is all digital.
Or
The medium format and 35. Yeah. Multiple lenses, I will say. I'm a little bit about, I like it here.
You always print on coded sheets?
No, I think it's
On
the,
that paper?
yeah, sometimes I think it's right tool for the job, right? Nails for speed, screws for strength.
How much time do you spend with your subject?
3 minutes, maybe. So it just depends on the situation. And sometimes I photograph people again. Sometimes I end up sitting in a garage having a beer with somebody. It sort of just depends on the situation. These are nice little, I mean, you can kind of see, this is actually sort of part of the edit in the book is, I love this guy sort of, well, first of all, he's lifting up his shirt to show me his tattoos. He was a Marine. He was a Marine. I was in Philly recently showing his pictures, and they're all like, "Go Birds!" And I'm like, "No." You gotta know sports. But I love this guy sort of picking up the shirts like those little wings, and then these guys with their capes. And then this picture where there's that sort of faux figure, and then there's other little wings in the other window, right? So that's a little. I think those 3 pictures are like in a row in the thing, and that's something where I'm using like shapes or ideas to sort of move us through the trajectory. This is probably a good example of how are we doing time-wise? Where are we?
You guys,
7.
15 minutes?
Oh, yeah, so, we'll go a little faster. This is a good example of a picture that you can't really even read in the book. And it's a funny one, so I don't know how to do it without putting it down. But I love that what's left what seems like that trace of a body in that chair and that exploding head. And the weird thing, I'm going to tell you like the story that, again, this is the kind of stuff I would never say, but about a year before I made this picture, I was photographing somewhere and I went into a culvert that was like pretty grown over, and I got in there and there was like garbage. I had to climb over this pile of garbage, and there was like, I set up my tripod, and there was I'm gonna put this down for a second, and there was and someone had been living in there, and on the back wall was this crazy photograph of this guy screaming with his head exploding and fire coming out of it, and I was like, oh my god! And I start making this picture, and I'm like looking through the viewfinder of the camera. I'm on the tripod. There's fucking flies are everywhere, and then I take my head away from the camera and I look down. Sorry, this is a little awful. And there's right under that thing is a dead guy. And I just was like, so I didn't make the picture. And because of my ill-spent youth, I kind of got out of it pretty quick, like cops or whatever. I'm always thinking I'm going to get in trouble for something, but that thing stuck with me, you know? And then I'm wandering around in this little town in Pennsylvania, and I find this. And I'm like, oh, there's the picture, right? And I don't know how to, I mean, hopefully you're getting a little of this, but I don't know how to express that for me. I mean, I have all this talk about all the pictures and stuff, but if I'm really honest, you know, it's like I'm still that 13-year-old kid, like walking around with my camera, trying to find some version of myself or my interior in some way. I'm seeing myself and I'm seeing my struggle and other people's struggle, which is not maybe the best. Politically, that's not the best thing, but it's like what it's what I do. I'm still looking for that sort of that little bit of a broken kid in some way, and I see other people having these experiences, and I recognize those experiences. I feel them. Maybe I'm just putting my own shit onto them. I don't know, but to me, they're also quite beautiful. And that thread, I feel like, is very much through the work. You know, I feel like if we're paying attention enough and really looking at the work we make, we can begin to identify that thing over time. When I was 21 or 22, I had this job for 2 years. I worked for Dwayne Michaels as his assistant. It was an unbelievable experience. And we went to photograph Wilhelm de Kooning out on Long Island. And Kooning had a little bit of Alzheimer's. It's a hilarious long story. But the end of the story is that I'm sitting on the ground packing up lights. Dwayne and de Kooning are in these two giant rocking chairs. Both of them were little guys, pretty much. You know, they're like me. And they're rocking back and forth in these chairs. And Dwayne's about 50-something, and he says to de Kooning, hey, Wilhelm, when did you start to feel like you knew who William de Kooning was or what your work was about? Because maybe in my 60s, I started to have an idea. And Dwayne says, I'm 50-something. I feel like I'm just starting to get it. And I thought to myself, oh, my God, I have time. I can take, now I'm 64, and I'm like, that's bullshit. No, it's not. I really feel like I'm just starting to get an inkling. You know, like I really feel like I'm starting to have a feeling about what I do and or what it is that I'm looking for. Maybe there's just enough work that I can look back and sort of make those connections over time. But the thing that was important about that thing for me, and I've stuck with it, is that this thing that we do is kind of a life in pursuit, right? It's not a thing that gets finished. You know, you get dead, that's what you get, right, in the end. And I love that about it. You know, it's always still exciting. I still love being out there. I still like walking around, looking at things, meeting people, finding things. So why don't I take some questions while I'm standing here. And I'll answer anything.
Are you tempted to move things? Like you talked about how you clarified that one composition by repositioning yourself. Do you stick with capturing what you find, or do you ever like?
I got no problem. Or people, or whatever. I don't always, I mean, I love the challenge of sort of trying to make everything work, and I love the physicality of thinking about where my body is in relationship to other bodies and sort of moving those around. And as I've said in that picture, sort of moving. This picture, I didn't have to do anything but move my body and sort of get up on another step maybe because to get a little bit more height. But in some of those pieces of string things, it's like, I definitely moved stuff in there. And in that very first body of work, where before I'd been told street photography and talk to anybody that's went around, that was all talking to people. Like I'm walking in, talking to people, telling them what I'm doing, getting in a car, following them up, like in Kentucky, to another little swimming place where they know of. And that was a totally different experience. And oftentimes I see something and I ask them to redo that thing. Sometimes it feels staged, too staged for me, and sometimes it doesn't.
When it came to your large format book, did you, I guess, okay, which is more important to you, the order of the photographs in the book, or which ones fall on pages of a natural two-page spread? Or do you, like, well, I'm assuming you know what it means, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I mean, there's definitely transitions and moments that I like, but that's, for me, I kind of hope that's invisible in some way, right? I kind of hope that what it's really doing is moving your eye and your consciousness in a place that you're seeing picture A and picture B, and picture C that's not there is in your head, right? And so that's sort of how I think about it, right? Like trying to make every picture really strong. And it's, oh, I should have said this out loud. I just think it's pretty interesting. Like I love it. There's all these publishers out there. I love all the books that I go to see. My favorite thing is to go to these book shows like in New York or Paris, where you see all these really different kinds of things. But the book has become one of the primary vehicles for photography, right? And as the book has become primary vehicle, people have gotten really, and this is just my own thing, please don't, and I could also cite plenty of books that I'm about to talk about that are actually work beautifully. But people have gotten so into the structure and sequencing of books and how they work, and even thinking about, relating that to literature, chapter breaks, starting at the beginning, ending at the end, like all the ways that things can become fractured, all those kinds of things. And as I've done that, the pictures have become more and more, less complicated in some ways, right? And there's been this thing, and it can really work. I'm just saying for me, it doesn't work, where the individual pictures, if you pull them out of the book, might not make sense, right? And that's okay because it's trying to do a different job. But I sometimes, for me, I'm interested in like, someone might sit with something for a really long time and then they might move again. And then they might sit and then they move, then they go back. And I want those pictures to be alive on their own, right?
I have a question.
Yeah, please. I tell you that.
You've known each other a long time.
Longer than 35 years.
I have a question, something I've been thinking about. So in the work, I see, like, you were talking about sort of ascension and descension, and, there's all this, like, despair and little glimmers of hope. But I'm curious if you think that sort of pain and tragedy, like, through the creation of meaning, beauty, lyricism, is that a form of hope? Is that a form of ascension, or is it in the content? Or maybe it's an and both, I don't know. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Curse you. It's really hard for me to answer because I have to actually stop myself because, like, even in my sequencing, because I find some things so beautiful, even though they are sometimes tragic. And I certainly don't want things to be a spectacle, so I'm really being careful to sort of have things sit right on that edge a little bit. If you're asking me, do I think they help?
No,
No?
I'm not really asking that,
Yeah.
except in the most existential way of like, we're all here.
Yeah.
Since we're mortal, we
Yeah.
have this time, just to be really grandiose
Yeah.
about it all. You know, so the pursuit of the art, like this extraordinary, I would say, articulation of pain, internal,
Mhm.
external. I guess I'm, you know, it's a leading question because it's so much, I feel like
Well,
my,
yeah,
right, you know, but.
you got a lot of that's the same.
But
We got some change.
But as I'm looking at the work, you know, it's like that, I'm just tremendously moved by that, by the way that it moves, there's form. And I guess I would also just say, like, seeing the physical prints, just particularly incredible because, I mean, this question came up before about the image, and it's like you're making these print objects, and there is so much of the time this feeling that photography can exist in all these different ways. And I could look at your website on my phone, or I could show Seth's pictures to my students the other day, but it's really an illusion, like what that is, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's really no different than like what you were talking about an art historian, like studying a Rembrandt or something. And they would never trick themselves into thinking they could study it from the JPEG in Wikipedia,
Right.
you know? So I love that you brought the prints.
But I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't feel like I'm answering your
Yeah,
question,
okay.
except for the fact that I will say, I don't want to say it's a cathartic experience for me because it's not, because it always feels sort of unresolved. I'm humbled that you say, because if I have dreams about them being out in the world, like I feel like I want people to look at my pictures and feel like they do when they read them. Yes, I'm not. Read a poem or hear a piece of music or something that just opens something up in them or takes them to a different place. It's kind of all I hope. And I don't pretend that all of the things that I'm interested or even care about are going to be evident to everybody, although I try to sort of put things together in a way where there's some guardrails that then allow you to sort of make the thing your own. So that doesn't probably answer the question.
No, thank you.
Is it later?
Yes, please.
Are these later? These photographs?
They're all from the same project, yeah.
I have a question about LED, is that okay?
Yes?
I am curious, like objects of dead people,
Yeah.
if they are.
Oh, that's pieces of string. Yes?
Yeah. They carry the magic of their touch, you know,
Mhm.
their consciousness, what they use it for, that kind of thing. I'm just wondering in your mind what the photograph does, like the physical object, and then what is it in the photograph? Like, does it retain the same magic?
I'm trying to play that game. Yes. I'm trying to get us to sort of imagine like this is the person who's sitting here with a list of stuff next to his chair where he's been sitting with the thing on his head and there's a gun there and what happened, right? Like, or it could just be a couple of newspapers and a cereal bowl on the table.
So it's specific to the narrative that we build in our heads about the person.
I think so, but it also allows us to think about this thing about, I don't know, because you kind of breath around me a lot, right? But it's such a weird thing to have someone not be there and all this evidence of them. Things that they touched, things that meant something to them, things that meant nothing to them, but all of a sudden everything has a giant amount of power, right? Like you walk into your dead mother's house, your sister's house, or a person you don't know, you're like, you know, this was the construction of this person's place, of how they lived in the world. I find that unbelievably touching and humbling. Sorry, I'm getting a little. And I will say that like this body of work, which I haven't talked about too much, I don't know if I could have made this body of work without making that body of work, because there's so much in here that I point to in the pictures that is about, it's like marks on things, like either by accident or by design. It's like, I feel like I'm walking around in all of the landscape pictures that I'm making, and even the stuff that's in the other pictures. I feel like I'm looking at that same stuff, like cave painting, right? Like I am looking at the evidence, the trace of what happened in this space, and then those things that contextualize the photographs of the people who are often looking out into space, or even if they're surrounded by other people, they're these sort of insular beings, as I said at the beginning, in some way bearing the weight of our time. Right?
It's like archaeology.
Yes. Yeah. And without making those other pictures, I don't think I would have started to recognize. I'm trying to find a good picture maybe to think about that stuff. Oh, maybe it's like, you know, it could be something simple like a flower on the watering can of that woman who was standing there, or on the big, on this picture, it's almost impossible to see anywhere else but on the print, in the print with enough light on it. But, you know, that old growth that's on the wall, right? That kind of, like that, I don't know if you can see that, like trace of what was the growing vine, the trace of that person's body. In the book, you'll see like stuff bleeding a lot, like because it's gotten wet and the rust is dripped, and then that happens again beside someone's head. You know, these things that become, again, well, this is one of my favorite pictures. I love this because it's just like that sort of division of up and down and whirly life and beauty in this place. Yeah.
And color. I mean, the depth of the blue versus the bright.
The bright and the yellow of it. It's like late afternoon. That's all shadows. So I kind of knew that was going to be blue. And up there's all that yellow from the sun setting against that building. Yeah. And then for me, the trick is to bring it all down and not have it be like screaming, right? Like let the color of her skin and that body sort of glow in there. So again, like this little statue, this beautiful young person in the midst of all of this other, you know, maybe it's a contemporary Eden of some sort, but not going too far. Any other questions?
Yeah, so typically when you're shooting, how much do you end up adjusting your color post versus while you're shooting?
I try to be pretty, I'm like a garbage in, garbage out person. You know, it's like I try to make the best sort of image, negative, I just don't call it negative, the best digital file I can make. But I am also not above making a really crappy file if the moment is right and the light is awful, and it needs to be super underexposed, then I'm going to figure it out later. Anybody else?
Do you use a mirrorless camera?
I do not. I still like looking through in fact, the first digital camera I had, it wasn't even a digital camera. I had an old Hasselblad with a phase 1 back on it forever because I didn't want to let go of that. As I said, I like the gear. I do like my medium format Hasselblad camera, but mostly I keep carrying that plastic shit around. You know, like I like feeling everything and seeing it. I mean, it's just part of my, like I like machinery and tools and stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I don't forget to take the free book and drop some money on these guys.